This is a video of a recording of the PACE 2019 National Scholastic Championship, including rounds 1 and 2, questions from round 1 and 2. So this is the first question of round 1. Philip K. Dick's story, quote, "We can remember it for you wholesale," unquote, ends with Quayle learning that he prevented one of these events through, quote, "kindness and mercy," unquote, alone. This kind of event is facilitated with a technology called sophons in a novel in which wall breakers help carry it out. Cixin Liu's book, The Dark Forest, begins 400 years before this kind of event is planned to occur. In another novel, the narrator knocks out an annoying curate in the aftermath of this kind of event. In that novel, a deadly weapon called black smoke and machines called tripods are used by a group carrying out this kind of event, but bacteria harmless to humans thwart that plan. For 10 points, give this kind of struggle shown in H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. And that kind of event is an invasion of Earth, or an alien invasion, any kind of conflict with aliens or extraterrestrials I could have accepted. Toss-up number 2. This city's rulers were charged with providing, quote, "care for all souls," unquote, in a proclamation by Zosimus the Bearded. Those rulers of this city adopted the double-headed eagle as a symbol after one of them married Sophia Palaiologina, and crowned themselves with a golden cap that supposedly awarded to their ancestors by Constantine Monomach. The monk Philothetus began the tradition of calling the city the Third Rome. By winning the great stand on the Ugra River, this city asserted its independence from the Tatar yoke imposed by the Golden Horde. Under its Rurikid rulers, this city replaced Constantinople as the focal point of Orthodox culture and housed such iconic painters as Andrei Rublev. For 10 points, name this city which contains the Kremlin. And that city is Moscow. Toss-up number 3. One book by this philosopher divides science into the categories of practical, theoretical, and productive. That book by this thinker includes logical, ontological, and psychological ways of stating the law of non-contradiction. In Book Theta of that work by this philosopher, he distinguishes between a substance's possible modes of existence, or potentiality, from its definite existence, or actuality. This philosopher proposed material, efficient, final, and formal as the 4 types of causes in a book which studies being qua being. This author of metaphysics discussed logic in Prior Analytics, which appears in his collection Organon. For 10 points, name this ancient Greek philosopher who founded the Lyceum. And that ancient Greek philosopher is Aristotle. Toss-up number 4. Due to its low atomic mass, beryllium is nearly transparent to this phenomenon, which allows it to serve as a window. Spectroscopic techniques using this radiation cannot effectively detect the presence of hydrogen or helium. Mann-Siegbahn introduced the notation used in spectroscopy based on this radiation, which includes the K-alpha transition. ESCA uses this phenomenon to induce the photoelectric effect. Because this radiation has wavelengths on the same scale as interatomic spacing, crystal lattices serve as effective diffraction gratings for it. Experiments with Crookes tubes resulted in Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery of this form of radiation. For 10 points, name this ionizing radiation with energy higher than UV light and lower than gamma rays. And the answer there, X-rays. Toss-up number 5. Ashley Montagu called these concepts a fallacy in the book Man's Most Dangerous Myth, and he helped UNESCO issue a 1950 statement that treated these concepts scientifically. Johann Blumenbach proposed 5 of these concepts and subscribed to the degenerist view that these concepts can be traced back to Adam and Eve. Samuel Morton used craniometric skull measurements to create these constructs to support his polygenist account on the origin of these groups. Historical examples of these groupings include Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. In the modern era, police officers often create profiles based on these constructs. For 10 points, name these sociological groupings of humans into categories such as black or white people. Answer there, race or races. Toss-up number 6. This city's goldsmiths once lived in the small cottages along Golden Lane that were built in the 16th century to house the men guarding its castle. Cultural attractions in this city include the Estates Theater, where Don Giovanni is premiered, and a national art museum that houses the Slav epic. In 2010, this city celebrated the 600th anniversary of an astronomical clock in the tower of its old town hall. This city's Pinkasova Memorial documents the 77,000 murdered Jews who once lived in its prominent Jewish quarter. Until the middle of the 19th century, the iconic Charles Bridge in this city was the only way to cross the Vltava River. For 10 points, name this chief city of Bohemia and capital of the Czech Republic. That city is Prague. This work concludes with the speaker telling readers that they are grossly mistaken if they think she can recollect any of the hodgepodge medley of speech she has just spoken. This essay praises bees and their inimitable combs for their industry despite being nature's dumb creatures. Much of this essay attacks long-robed philosophers, artisans, and priests, and describes how the title character is served by laziness, forgetfulness, and self-love. This encomium is often published with the illustrations of Hans Holbein, and is named for a goddess who is the daughter of Youth and Plutus, laughing at the stupidity of the world. Thomas More is the dedicee of, for 10 points, what essay by Desiderius Erasmus that venerates foolishness? And that essay is In Praise of Folly. Toss-up number 8. In 1905, a jury in this state refused to convict a man who admitted to shooting Guy Bradley, a game warden tasked with single-handedly protecting this state's birds from poachers. Dixie Highway booster Carl G. Fisher put up a billboard in Times Square boasting that it was June in this state during a 1920s land bubble ended by the sinking of the Prinz Valdemar. In that same decade, a white mob destroyed Rosewood, which, like Eatonville, was an all-black community in this state. In 1992, this state was the first in the contiguous U.S. where the Category 5 Hurricane Andrew made landfall. Henry Flagler built a railroad to an island off this state's coast, sometimes called the Conch Republic. For 10 points, name this state home to Key West. And the answer there is Florida. Toss-up number 9. A more politically neutral version of this painting, which adds a woman in a blue and white striped dress to its right, was painted by Paul Baudry. An arm in this painting is often compared to one in Caravaggio's Entombment of Christ and is found next to an object whose handle was changed from white to black. Having seen the actual scene of this painting, the artist added such details as a green rug and a vinegar-soaked cloth wrapped around its subject's head. The artist's signature is found on a block of wood in this painting next to the title figure's slumped arm, which holds a fountain pen. A bloody letter from Charlotte Corday is shown in, for 10 points, what Jacques-Louis David painting of an assassinated French revolutionary? And that painting is The Death of Marat. Toss-up number 10. The formula for the grand potential reduces to this equation if the log z term equals particle number. This equation is true if, at constant temperature, entropy scales linearly with the log of volume. If this equation is true, then all the departure and residual functions are zero, and the enthalpy depends only on temperature. This equation is generally a decent approximation if the specific volume is greater than 5 liters per mole. This equation is equivalent to setting the compressibility factor to 1, or when the A and B parameters are 0 in the van der Waals equation. A constant found in this equation is approximately 8.314 joules per mole Kelvin. For 10 points, name this equation of state used for gases at low pressures and high temperatures that equates PV to nRT. And that would be the ideal gas law. Toss-up number 11. An author with this surname wrote about a girl who is lazy, laughing, languid, and fond of a kiss and fond of a guinea. Another author with this surname edited a poetry magazine whose title alludes to the concept that human imagination contains the germ of an idea. This family included William Michael, as well as an author who wrote of 2 young women telling each other, "Come and kiss me, never mind my bruises, hug me, kiss me, suck my juices." The poem Jenny was written by an author of this family who wrote a poem in which the title figures state, come by, to Laura, who gives a lock of hair in exchange for fruit. Goblin Market was written by Christina, a member of, for 10 points, what family that included the artist Dante Gabriel? And that surname is Rossetti. Lysine and arginine, this is toss-up 12, lysine and arginine residues in collagen and crystalline may cross-link by reacting with this compound, which forms the most common AGE. Glyphosins inhibit the function of a sodium-potassium pump-powered transporter of this compound found in the kidney. A roughly 3-month average for plasma concentration of this compound can be obtained by measuring hemoglobin ALC levels. 3 equivalents of this molecule are transferred from a chain by debranching enzyme. Amylin lowers blood levels of this compound, as does the drug metformin. Cellular absorption of this typical substrate of hexokinase is promoted by hormones produced by the pancreatic beta cells. For 10 points, glucagon and insulin modulate blood levels of what monosaccharide? The answer there is glucose. Could have also accepted D-glucose or dextrose. Toss-up number 13. This man's son, Amphictyon, was supposedly the first person to learn to mix wine with water. This king ended a conflict by sacrificing to Zeus at a seaweed-covered shrine near the river Cephissus. On the advice of his father, this king of Phthia began a construction project shortly after a god drank a soup made from lamb, goat, and the flesh of Nyctimus, who was the son of the impious Arcadian king Lycaon. After reaching a mountain often identified as Athos or Orthris, he visited an oracle of Themis, who told him to throw the bones of his mother over his shoulder, which he and his wife realized referred to rocks. For 10 points, name this son of Prometheus who repopulated the earth after surviving a flood with his wife Pyrrha. And that would be Deucalion. Toss-up number 14. In the aftermath of this event, an oval-shaped oculus, designed to resemble a bird leaving the hands of a child, was built for a transportation hub designed by Santiago Calatrava. The firm Davis Brody Bond designed an underground museum to this event and is reached by a large glass-enclosed pavilion made by the Norwegian firm Snøhetta. This event, which resulted in the destruction of a complex designed by Minoru Yamasaki, led to the creation of a new set of buildings designed by Daniel Libeskind, the tallest of which is exactly 1,776 feet high. The art installation Tribute in Light, in which 88 searchlights project 2 light beams into the air, commemorates the destruction of the World Trade Center during, for 10 points, what terrorist act in 2001? Answer there. The September 11th, 2001 attacks. I just needed September 11th, or I also could have accepted 9/11, or something about the destruction of the World Trade Center. Toss-up number 15. Islamic scholars often divide the world into a House of Islam, or Dar al-Islam, the Dar al-Ad, and a third Dar named for this concept. Elias Kennedy's Crowds and Power asserts that Islam exhibits the unmistakable traits of a religion of this concept. Christian ethics of this concept's legitimacy, as outlined by Hugo Grotius and Thomas Aquinas, are often compared to a passage from the Cow Surah about transgressors. A passage from Isaiah 2:4 about pruning hooks and plowshares states that nations shall not train for this concept anymore. The righteousness of this concept is assessed by St. Augustine's just theory of it. For 10 points, jihad by the sword is often described as a holy form of what concept? And the answer there is war. I could have also accepted holy war, Qital, Harb, Dar al-Harb, fighting or killing before train for. I could have also accepted, I would have had to prompt on conflict, but I could not have accepted or prompted on jihad or fitna. Toss-up number 16. The speaker of this poem promises to use sea winds blown from east and west and the breath of my chant to make a perfume. The call of a bashful and tender singer is heard by this poem speaker when he visits a swamp. This poem closes by mentioning the fragrant pines and cedars that had repeatedly been mentioned throughout its 15 sections. This poem includes 7 italicized stanzas that are the lyrics of a carol sung by a gray-brown bird. This poem speaker identifies its addressee with the western orb sailing the heaven, A solitary thrush and a great star early drooped in the western sky in the night are referenced in, for 10 points, What Long Elegy to Abraham Lincoln, written by Walt Whitman. And the answer there is When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. And I needed the entire title. Toss-up number 17. Archaeologist Barry Cunliffe, who has written extensively on these ancient people, argues in his book Facing the Ocean that they grew out of maritime interaction in the Bronze Age as opposed to from the continental Hallstatt culture. The Spanish region of Galicia asserts that it should be a member of a six-nation league named for these people. The Latin culture was created by these people, whose namesake fringe includes the regions of Cornwall and Brittany. A 19th century revival of the culture of these people promoted insular art styles such as their namesake cross, as well as the festival of Samhain. The Druids were priests of, for 10 points, what ancient people whose namesake languages are still spoken in Wales and Ireland? And those would be the Celts, or the Celtic people, Celtic language, Celtic revival, Celtic fringe. Toss-up number 18. In the 19th century, William Douglas patented a lenticular pony designed for use on these things. The physicist Theodore von Karman was on a panel that investigated the failure of one of these things, which turned out to have been caused by a rare twisting mode degree of freedom induced from aeroelastic flutter. The engineer Heinrich Gerber patented several ways of constructing these things, including one using hinges to create cantilevers on them. It was commonly thought that wind-induced resonance destroyed the Tacoma Narrows one of these things in 1942. A simple one of these structures may consist of a girder, to which a truss may be added to prevent buckling from compression. For 10 points, name these structures that are often built over rivers. Those would be bridges. Toss-up number 19. This composer considered using the label Symphony Grotesque for the Symphony No. 1 in F minor he completed at age 19. This composer's friends in the Beethoven Quartet asked him to write a quartet with a piano part so that he could travel with them, resulting in his piano quintet in G minor. The Beethoven Quartet also premiered all but 2 of this man's 15 string quartets, including his 8th, which uses his monogram D, E-flat, C, B, and is dedicated to, quote, the victims of fascism and war, unquote. After being rebuked for formalist tendencies by an article in Pravda, this composer wrote his Symphony No. 5 in response to justified criticism of his opera Lady Macbeth of the Mtsensk. For 10 points, name this Soviet composer of the Leningrad Symphony. That would be Dmitri Shostakovich. Toss-up number 20. This is the penultimate toss-up of this first packet. This body of water's basin was home to a religious complex called the Yayamama culture. Johann Reinhard found an underwater temple in this body, which was probably built by the same culture that built the Gate of the Sun just south of it at Tiwanaku. Natives who lived near this body of water helped build Thor Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki raft, which was modeled on traditional reed boats used to cross it. Raised field architecture was developed to exploit this body of water by local Aymara people. This body, the largest in the Altiplano, is inhabited by many Quechua speakers who moved here during the Inca times. The highest navigable major lake in the world is, for 10 points, what South American lake which straddles the border of Peru and Bolivia? And that would be Lake Titicaca. Toss-up number 21, the final toss-up of this packet. The poet Stesichorus was supposedly blinded for criticizing, then unblinded for writing an encomium about this figure. Herodotus interviewed priests in the temple of foreign Aphrodite who said that a king named Proteus sequestered this figure. Polydamna gave the drug nepenthe to this person, who in some stories feigns Bacchic rites in order to use a torch as a signal. A sword belonging to Deiphobus is hidden by this woman, who in some stories is replaced by an eidolon made of clouds and spends 10 years in Egypt. The oath of Tyndareus was sworn by suitors of this woman, who accordingly join in a conflict sparked when she is taken from the Menelaus by Paris. For 10 points, name this queen of Sparta whose abduction ignited the Trojan War. And the answer there is Helen of Troy. I just needed Helen. We're going to move on to packet number 2, or round number 2 of this tournament. Again, this is the PACE 2019 National Scholastic Championship, and these are the toss-ups for round 2. Toss-up number 1. A holy text of this sect notes that life, truth, and love comprise the triune person called God, and uniquely refers to God as the Father-Mother. God, sacrament, and life are the first 3 of 26 fixed sermon topics that are repeated twice a year in churches of this denomination. Members of this sect believe in the falsity of the second book of Genesis. The founder of this faith claimed to use mental surgery to heal broken bones, but allowed followers to receive materia medica assistance if they were so injured they could not pray and receive spiritual healing. This church's reading rooms stock many copies of A Key to the Scriptures. For 10 points, name this sect, founded by Mary Baker Eddy, that publishes a namesake Monitor newspaper. And that Christian sect is Christian Science, or the Church of Christ, Scientist. Toss-up number 2. 19th century social critic Henry Mayhew documented how a breed of wild pigs with ferocious snouts supposedly attacked people who ventured into one of the places in Hampstead. The angel Islington protects one of these places in the Neil Gaiman series Neverwhere. The painter John Martin designed one of these systems in London, very similar to the one built 25 years later by Joseph Bazalgette, and one of them in Vienna is where Harry Lime shoots Sergeant Payne in the film The Third Man. A London example of these systems was built following the 1858 Great Stink and includes a pumping station at Deptford, fed effluent materials by manholes and storm drains. For 10 points, name these city sanitation systems that are usually underground. And those would be sewers. Could have also accepted sewerage system, wastewater treatment system, water sanitation system before the end, but would have had to prompt on answers like underground or anything below a city or just a storm drain. Toss-up number 3. The newspapers Politiken and The Observer published a joint investigation into an event in this conflict which resulted in protests that trapped Ambassador James Sasser inside an embassy. The Ahtisaari plan is designed to resolve ongoing issues stemming from this war, which was officially ended with the Kumanovo Treaty. 3 journalists were killed in an accidental bombing of a Chinese embassy during this conflict. After the failure of the Rambouillet Conference during this conflict, NATO Operation Allied Force began. After the KLA declared their desire for Greater Albania, this war began with an invasion ordered by Slobodan Milosevic. For 10 points, name this war over a breakaway region of Yugoslavia with capital at Pristina. And that would be the Kosovo Independence War. Could have also accepted Kosovar Independence War, anything about a war in Kosovo. I would have had to prompt on Yugoslav wars or Balkan wars, and would have had to prompt on NATO bombing campaigns in Yugoslavia. Toss-up number 4. This phenomenon may be represented by disconnected bubbles on a Feynman diagram. This phenomenon names an effect in which virtual particle-antiparticle pairs generated by an electric field weaken the field due to reorienting themselves. The impedance due to this phenomenon can be approximated at 120 pi ohms. Fluctuations in this entity lead to the presence of zero-point energy at the ground state. A pair of neutral conducting plates with this entity in between will still experience attractive or repulsive forces in the Casimir effect. The constants epsilon naught and mu naught, respectively, are the permittivity and permeability of this entity. For 10 points, name this term referring to space with very low pressure due to the absence of matter. And that term is vacuum. I could have also accepted free space. Toss-up number 5. In a poem by this author, the speaker wishes to, quote, sleep the sleep of the apples, unquote. This author described a silver-eyed woman who dreams in the bitter sea in a poem that twice mentions the image of, quote, the horse on the mountain, unquote. This author of Ghazal of Dark Death began a poem with the line, quote, green, how I want you green, unquote. A, quote, Ruum iridescent with agony, unquote, appears in a poem by him named for an event that occurred at 5 in the afternoon. This author grieved the death of Ignacio Sanchez Mejias in, quote, Lament for the Death of a Bullfighter, unquote. Leonardo Felix and the groom kill each other because they both love the bride in a play in this author's rural trilogy. For 10 points, name this Spanish author of Gypsy Ballads and Blood Wedding. And that would be Lorca, Federico Garcia Lorca. Or I could have accepted Federico del Sagrado Corazón de Jesús García Lorca, if you knew his entire name. Toss-up number 6. After a worker from this country was found murdered in a freezer, its president banned his citizens from taking new jobs in Kuwait. Approximately 10% of this country's population lives abroad, sometimes sending Balik Bayan boxes back home. This country's GDP-boosting Build, Build, Build program includes an expansion of Clark International Airport and is supported by a politician who formerly served as mayor of Davao City. The 2014 Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement allowed U.S. troops to return to this one-time colony. At an Asian meeting, ASEAN meeting, this country's president denied his police were committing extrajudicial killings as part of a brutal war on drugs. For 10 points, Rodrigo Duterte leads what country from Manila? That would be the Philippines. Toss-up number 7. This artist's works featuring monkeys include one showing a monkey using a detonator and one showing a sign that says, "Laugh now, but one day we'll be in charge." This artist made a version of the Mona Lisa in pink, as well as a version showing her holding a bazooka. A policeman on his hands and knees snorts cocaine in one of this artist's many works criticizing coppers. In another work by this artist, a masked rioter prepares to throw a flower bouquet. To create his piece, Love is in the Bin, he put a shredder inside a copy of one of his murals, causing it to self-destruct at an auction in 2018. That mural by this artist shows a girl extending her arm towards a red heart-shaped balloon. For 10 points, name this anonymous British street artist. And that would be Banksy. This is toss-up number 8. In this country, the Black Angel was accused of masterminding an assassination attempt on a journalist on Tonelero Road, leading to a political crisis. A radical group in this country named itself the October 3rd Club after the date that one leader of this country took power, overthrowing Washington Lewis. A 1935 uprising in this country was led by Plinio Salgado and a group of green-shirted fascists known as the Integralists. A leader of this country wrote, "I leave life to enter history" in the Letter of Testament before killing himself. It's not Portugal, but that leader of this country established the Estado Novo dictatorship in 1937. For 10 points, name this South American country once ruled by Getulio Vargas. That country is Brazil. Toss-up number 9. In one story written in this language, a king is murdered by a talking, decapitated head that tells him to lick his fingers to separate the pages of a poisoned book. A fisherman casts his net only to draw up a jar of sand and a dead donkey in another story in this language. The Tale of the Three Apples was written in this language, which was also used for a story in which a slave named Morgiana pours boiling oil onto robbers hiding in jars. Sir Richard Burton translated a collection in this language in which a king repeatedly postpones an execution so that he can hear the cliffhanger ending to each of his wives' stories. For 10 points, name this language used to relay the tales of Aladdin and Ali Baba in 1001 Nights. And that would be Arabic. Toss-up number 10. Synthesis of this compound is irreversibly blocked by phenylalanine, and parachloroamphetamine selectively kills cells that produce it. When tumors that primarily overproduce this molecule metastasize to the liver, carcinoid syndrome can develop. Elevated levels of this molecule in the body are detected by a urine test for 5-hydroxyindole acetic acid. The RAFE nuclei of the brainstem and enterochromaffin cells produce this monoamine. TPH catalyzes this neurotransmitter synthesis from tryptophan. Its reuptake from the synaptic cleft is inhibited by sertraline and duloxetine. SSRIs work as antidepressants by blocking reabsorption of, for 10 points, what neurotransmitter which regulates appetite and mood. And that neurotransmitter is serotonin. Toss-up number 11. The end of a war against this ruler left James Rooke unemployed, leading him to organize a group of soldiers of fortune called the British Legions. Though this ruler wasn't king of Spain, the junta councils which led resistance to him provided the model for many cabildos, such as the one which declared the independence of Buenos Aires. Conservative Creoles organized revolt after opponents of this man proclaimed the liberal constitution of Cadiz. While resisting his invasions, Prince John VI of Portugal and his court sailed for Rio de Janeiro hours before this ruler's armies captured Lisbon. Simón Bolívar witnessed this man's crowning as emperor in Notre Dame Cathedral. For 10 points, name this French ruler who lost the Peninsular War. And that would be Napoleon. Napoleon I. I just needed Napoleon, though. Toss-up number 12. The engineer John Milne incorporated a horizontal pendulum into a new form of this device and was tasked with installing them throughout the world. In modern forms of these devices, a suspended inertial mass moves an apparatus in response to the motion of a plate anchored to the surface below. An ancient variety of this kind of device featured 8 dragon heads and 8 toads and was devised by the Chinese astronomer Zhang Heng in 132 AD. Modern versions of these devices typically use a needle to record zigzags on a continuous rolling sheet of graph paper. Those zigzags are caused by incoming love, Rayleigh S and P waves. Their output may be converted into a magnitude on the Richter scale. For 10 points, name these devices which measure and record earthquakes. And that device is called a seismometer. Toss-up number 13 of round 2. Since 1987, the recipient of this honor is awarded a medal whose reverse depicts the words firmness, commodity, and delight. In 2018, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer was named the chair of the 8-person jury that gives this award. People who have won this award include the male author of a book about complexity and contradiction in a certain discipline, and the Dutch author of Delirious, New York. This award has been given to Robert Venturi. In 1988, half of this award was given to a Brazilian who frequently collaborated with Lucio Costa, an urban planner who helped relocate a country's capital to Brasilia. Oscar Niemeyer was a recipient of, for 10 points, what award considered to be the Nobel Prize of Architecture? And that is called the Pritzker Prize. Toss-up number 14. Large values of this quantity drive Ostwald ripening since the critical radius for nucleation scales linearly with it. This quantity is still often reported in multiples of outdated unit ratios involving ergs, dynes, and centimeters. In biochemistry, Triton X100 is used to reduce this quantity to lyse cells. 3 of these quantities, measured in pairs between a solid, a liquid, and a gas, are related by the cosine of the contact angle. Superhydrophobic coatings have ultra-high values for this quantity. Emulsions and micelles are solubilized by detergents that reduce this quantity. For 10 points, name this quantity, the force required to expand an interface per length, which is high for strongly cohesive liquids like water. And that would be surface tension. Could have also accepted surface energy, interfacial tension, or interfacial energy. Toss-up number 15. Large ritual objects made of this material, called intihuatana, served as metaphorical hitching posts of the sun to which maidens were tied during the Raimi festival. This material was used to create a race of dumb giants who were then washed away and replaced by a second generation of humans created by the Inca god Viracocha Debunked theories suggests that large objects made of this material imply the presence of pre-Columbian Chinese or African rulers in present-day Tabasco province. The open mouth of the god Tonatiuh is shown at the center of a round Aztec object made of this material, which contains a ritual calendar and represents the sun. The Olmecs carved giant heads out of, for 10 points, what general material that composes the Andes? That would be stone. Toss-up number 16. Upon seeing Aubrey Beardsley's depiction of a billet doux from this poem, James Whistler told Beardsley, "You are a great artist." This poem ends with the title object being consecrated to fame in the midst of stars, and opens with the speaker singing this verse to a muse named C who is the author's friend John Carroll. The proclamation, "Let spades be trumps," is spoken by a sylph during this poem's depiction of the card game Ombre. In this poem, Clarissa gives a baron a two-edged pair of scissors whose little engine is used to take the title object from Belinda. The line, "What mighty contests rise from trivial things," begins, for 10 points, what rhyming mock heroic poem written by Alexander Pope? And that poem is The Rape of the Lock. I just needed Rape of the Lock. Toss-up number 17. He's not Charles Ives, but this composer quoted Beethoven's Fate motif in both the first and fourth movements of his Piano Sonata No. 3 in F minor. A ballad, romanza, a popular intermezzo in A major, and 3 other intermezzi comprise this composer's 6 pieces for piano, opus 118. Ignaz Pleyel probably wrote the St. Anthony choral that this composer used as the basis of his variations on a theme by Haydn. The lyrics, Guten Abend, Gute Nacht, begin this man's opus 49, number 4 piece for piano and voice, which begins with the notes short G, long B flat. Throughout his adult life, this man was in unrequited love with pianist Clara Schumann. For 10 points, name this composer of A German Requiem and A Namesake Lullaby. That composer is Brahms. Toss-up number 18. The losing candidate in this election year lost traction with voters after he slipped and fell at a campaign rally in Chico, California. In this election year, a candidate returned and then reaccepted a $1,000 contribution from the LGBT group the Log Cabin Republicans. The 73-year-old losing candidate in this election was married to a former Secretary of Labor who subsequently became North Carolina's first female senator. His running mate was a former San Diego Chargers quarterback named Jack Kemp. This was the first presidential election following the contract with America and featured a repeat run by Reform Party candidate Ross Perot. For 10 points, name this election in which Bob Dole was defeated by incumbent Bill Clinton. And that would be the election of 1996. Toss-up number 19. A member of this family named Vincent has his draft survey hidden by his mother Mary Moriarty since her other son Kenneth died in the war. Princeton's Firestone Library holds the only authorized manuscripts of several stories about this family, including The Last and Best of the Peter Pans and The Ocean Full of Bowling Balls. A member of this family ends the novel in which he appears by saying, "Don't tell anybody anything. If you do, you start missing everybody." Characters from this family include a sellout writer who works for Hollywood named D.B., and a narrator who observes his sister riding a carousel shortly after he is expelled from Pensy Prep. For 10 points, what family includes Holden, the narrator of The Catcher in the Rye? And that family would be the Caulfield family. Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye. Toss-up number 20. In one book, this author used the phrase glorious mental dawn to describe revolutionary France, which he held was an era in which, quote, all thinking begins shared in the jubilation, unquote. This author argued that China was characterized by a theocratic despotism in a treatise claiming that the history of the world is nothing but the development of the idea of freedom. This author's lectures on the philosophy of history is often interpreted as claiming Africa has no history. An 1807 work written by this idealist is often read as discussing the concept of a synthesis forming the clash between a thesis and antithesis. For 10 points, name this German philosopher who proposed a dialectical method in the phenomenology of spirit. That would be Hegel. George Friedrich Wilhelm Hegel. And the final toss-up for round 2 and the final toss-up for this video. In a short chapter of this novel, a character states that if the narrator should ever run into Albert Schweitzer, he should tell him, quote, you are not my hero, unquote. This novel concludes with the narrator reading a note stating a man's wish to climb a mountain named for Earl McCabe, writing a history of human stupidity, and then thumbing you-know-who. During an air show in this novel commemorating the 100 Martyrs to Democracy, a plane crashes into a dictator's palace, causing an apocalypse. This novel's characters include Papa Monzano, a dictator whose death fulfills a prophecy made in the books of Bokanon. The scientist Felix Bokanon creates a deadly substance called Ice-9 in, for 10 points, what novel by Kurt Vonnegut? And that novel is Cat's Cradle. And that concludes the reading of the first 2 rounds of the 2019 PACE NSC tournament.